My name is Titi Maria. I have a little bit of background in the nuclear industry, and I also use my social media platform to try and demystify nuclear to the audience. So let's start. What is nuclear energy? It's basically an atom splitting, and once they split, they release energy, and that energy is what is used to power. The difference between a nuclear power plant, for example, and a coal plant is because you have to burn coal for you to get heat, right? For nuclear, you get the heat through a process called nuclear fission. And uranium in its natural form, there's nothing you can do with it. It has to go through an ignition process. And most people say that if you have nuclear, you're going to use it for bomb. First of all, that's a lie, because whatever uranium you use for nuclear is enriched to about 3 to 5%. For bomb, you need to enrich it to over 90%. So basically, there's no way even Kenya or any country that is signed to have nuclear for peaceful purpose can use it for any other purpose besides peaceful application. And peaceful application, how many people have gone for CT scan, PET scan? Or family members? Do you remember that is actually nuclear fission in action? So the application of nuclear is not just energy. We use it in the medical sector. We are actually applying nuclear technology in the medical sector as is. We are using it also in the agricultural sector to generate climate-resistant seeds. A very interesting fact is the fact that one pellet of uranium is compared to 17,000 gallons of cubic meter of gas. But the comparison you have, one pellet is normally fed in a rod. The rod is like filled with the pellets, and then the pellets are put together to form a fuel assembly. And that fuel assembly is the one that is put in a reactor to cause a chain reaction as shown above. So the global overview, I'll just give you a global overview of what is happening in the nuclear energy sector. It's being used in many different countries. In fact, as we speak, we have over 440 power plants for generation of electricity, not research reactor, the ones that use isotopes for medical and all. We have over 440 power plants across 31 countries, and currently we have 60 countries who are building or either constructing new power plants or restarting the ones that are already there, maybe transforming coal plants to nuclear plants. And then we have over 50 countries utilizing nuclear energy in the different other applications. And like I mentioned, the medical sector, the the agricultural sector, industrial sector. Example is the Ghana. Ghana has a research reactor, but is in the process of developing its first nuclear power plant. Same as Morocco, they have a research reactor, but they're in the process of creating a nuclear power plant. And Kenya also has the same goal as well. Where CIA is for generation of electricity. I mean for research reactor, for the medical sector. How many? Good job. Yeah, Konza, that's the proposed site. Yeah. For a research reactor. So the difference with a research reactor, you use it to produce isotopes. Those isotopes are the ones that are used in the medical sector. Like I've mentioned, if you go for a PT scan, you're probably given a medication to swallow, or they inject you. They have something that is called a radio tracer. So when you pass through the PT scan, it's able to trace that, and that's a process called through radiation. They're able to trace it, and they're able to see where you have an issue. So this slide gives an overview of now generation of electricity using nuclear power plants. And the biggest user of nuclear power is the United States. And we all know they are around Kusema also, I think. And you have France, and France is actually the biggest exporter of electricity in Europe. And they use nuclear power to the biggest source of electricity is nuclear power, which is between 60 to 70%. And they generate a lot of income from just exporting nuclear. So imagine in Kenya, if you have nuclear, you're able to export, because even the Tanzania is in the process of building a nuclear power plant. Neighbor Uganda is also in the journey as well, Rwanda. But if Kenya were able to beat them, then that means that the opportunity for us to export electricity. And then we have China. China is already having like about 60.9 gigawatts of electricity from nuclear power. And currently, I've mentioned that there are about over 60. Out of that 60, 30 reactors are actually from China. They're really improving in their nuclear power plants. Then, of course, we have Russia, South Korea, Canada, Ukraine. We have Japan. Japan, the same Japan that had Fukushima, is the same Japan that you're seeing there. In fact, as of February last year, 2025, the government made a decision to restart 14 of their nuclear reactors. They have been shut down, of course, after Fukushima and everything. But then the government realized this opportunity and they restarted those 14 reactors. And then we have India, and then we have Spain. These are just top users of nuclear energy. But in Africa, we have so many countries that are coming up. We have currently South Africa is the only one that has a nuclear power plant. And then Egypt, they're in the process of actually finalizing their nuclear power plant, which is being built under an agreement with Russia. They're currently in the last phase, which is like phase 3. They're constructing their plant. And then we have, of course, us, Kenya, who are in the phase 2. Okay, so the International Atomic Energy Agency has phases that you have to go through. So phase 1, you make a decision. If a country says they want to go nuclear, then the country makes that decision. IAEA comes, they do a review, then they move to phase 2. So phase 2 is more preparatory works, where you do the siting, where you do stakeholder engagement, emergency preparedness, and all that. So Kenya, Ghana, Rwanda, and Rwanda, we're in phase 2. And then you have like Namibia, Tanzania, Uganda, our neighbors, Senegal, who are joining in phase 1. So, of course, not just European countries, but also Africa is also considering nuclear. Let me ask, do we need nuclear? We don't. How many people think we have enough sources of energy? Okay. How many people think we need to do better? Okay. To utilize what we already have, or to utilize what we already have? That's a good answer. I like that. Okay, but the problem is, what we already have is basically more of geothermal. I like what the government has done with geothermal. So we have about 48% of electricity coming from geothermal. And then you have about 20% coming from wind, from the solar, and the likes. But the challenge is, the sun does not always shine, and the wind does not always blow. And the climate situation is growing, then that means they will not have stability in that sector. And when you look at the amount of land that you need for a wind plant, for example, or a solar, compared to the one that you use for nuclear, well, that's something you may want to consider. So yeah, the government made a decision in April 2010 to consider having nuclear as part of its energy mix. Reason being, we needed stability, and also the fact that Vision 2030 wanted to make Kenya an industrial country. So we moved from where we are to a middle-income country. And the only way we can do that is if we have a reliable country, right? If you have a reliable country, then that means you're able to industrialize, you're able to improve your economy and even the social economy. So in 2010, a committee was formed, and then later that year, a nuclear power committee was decided to include the nuclear as part of Kenya's energy mix, and then it formed a Nuclear Energy Project Committee. The committee was under the Ministry of Energy to just start off the process, because they're supposed to do pre-feasibility studies. You remember I mentioned that the IAEA has a milestone approach. So before a country makes a decision, you have to do a pre-feasibility study. Basically, look at your energy mix, look at your resources, look at your capabilities, and then make a decision on whether or not you want to go nuclear. So once they decided that this is a possibility, the Kenya Nuclear Electricity Board was established. That is in 2012. So as we progressed and the feasibility study was done, and other studies include the siting, the stakeholder engagement, the waste management, how are we going to handle that situation, and including even the stakeholder engagement, like I've mentioned, and just the management of nuclear. The decision was made, and then the Kenya Nuclear Electricity Board was later transformed to Nuclear Power and Energy Agency, which is the promoter. So basically, the promoter oversees or just guides the government on what needs to be done based on the International Atomic Energy Agency's guideline to be able to make sure that nuclear is implemented in the most safe way and in the most based on the international standards that are set. Okay, I have a question, right? So I will mention that nuclear energy was a decision made by the government way before. So who do you think needs to be included in terms of institutions to make sure that this project is successful? Kenjin. Okay, good answer. Any? Sorry? Oh, the people, good one. Yes, very important. So the three key institutions that need to be formed for any country that wants to go nuclear. So you have the promoter, which is the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency. So basically, like I mentioned, the promoter advises the government on what needs to be done based on the International Atomic Energy Agency regulations. So all infrastructure issues, like I mentioned, from the siting, human resource to emergency preparedness, waste management, everything in between, and what needs to be done, regulations, policies, that's the work of the owner, of the promoter. And then just recently, Kenya identified KenGen as the owner operator. So yes, they do generate electricity through geothermal, hydro and wind, but now they have another mandate, which is the owner operator. Basically, they take up the project from where it is right now and run with it to the construction and the commissioning of a nuclear power plant. And then a very, very important, in fact, we will not move, we cannot move, and we will never move unless we have regulations. That's where the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority comes on board. It was established in 2019, same as the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency, through the Nuclear Regulatory Energy Act. All this information is available online for anyone who's interested. So I'd like us to look at the energy mix and just give a justification on why we need nuclear. Like I mentioned, our biggest, we generate most of our electricity from geothermal, which is about 48%. Then we have hydro, we have solar, and we have wind. We have about 7% coming from thermal, and then we have another percent, like 2%, that we import. And then other sources where people, you find like industries, they actually generate their own electricity. This information, I got it from EPA report. I actually have one colleague who's from EPA to attest to this. And these reports are published every year. So if you're interested in knowing where your energy is coming from, how much of it is being used and all that, EPRA, they normally issue this report every financial year. And this information is based on the last financial year. And you see, actually, the reason why I've actually put it as a concern is because if you look at the climate change, energy is actually the contributor of the climate issues that we're having. So one of the goals the government has is decarbonization, to reduce and make sure that we have clean sources of energy. So actually, nuclear plays a very key role in this, because at the point of generating electricity, it does not emit any gas, carbon, CO2. It's clean. It's actually the second cleanest after solar. Okay, of course, the reason I mentioned this before, nuclear is reliable because it's a baseload tower, meaning that it generates electricity 24 hours. It's not like dependent on solar when there's solar is when probably you need to generate electricity, but it's 24 hours. Once it starts operating, it's 24 hours. Then it provides energy security, and also through when you have a reliable energy, then your economy also will be able to grow, because then you'll have industries coming up. And in fact, I had a conversation the other day during the international conference, and one of the participants from South Africa was saying that people want to come and invest in Kenya, but because of energy situation, they cannot, because there's no sustainability. So they would rather invest somewhere else. So you see, that's a challenge, because then we are losing opportunity. And then I've mentioned energy transition, which is basically for clean. I've mentioned this, the milestone approach. So the International Atomic Energy Agency, they normally refer to as the global watch, of nuclear, and they give us a standard guideline of what needs to be done there. So what you're seeing pre-project is normally called the phase 1, which I've already mentioned that Kenya did that in 2010 till 2015, where we had the INI mission. Basically, it's International Nuclear Infrastructure Review Mission, which is done by experts from International Atomic Energy Agency and different experts from different countries, actually. So now we are currently in phase 2, as you're seeing from that slide. And what we've done as a country is capacity building. We've done a site selection process. We've done, of course, stakeholder engagement to some extent. We have an issue with that, but a lot has been done. Now, from where we are, KenGen is supposed to take over to make sure that we run through till phase 3, the construction and commissioning. If you were to ask most questions, like the most recent, the most asked question is why Siaya or why Kilifi? I'm sure how many people are asking the same question. Other when you heard about nuclear, like I want to know why this particular site. Okay, I see a hand there and a few notes somewhere. So it's okay. I get it. To some extent, there's a political influence to it, but it was not defined by the political situation. So before anything else, there's among the 19 infrastructure issue, siting is one of them. And you have to go through a process that is done by experts to identify these sites. And some of the criteria that you use, you need a large pool of water because of cooling. So of course, anywhere along the coast, the Lake region, the Turkana region, the Rift Valley region. But because of certain things, like this, if there's a potential of earthquake, for example, you rule out that. And that's why the Rift Valley region was ruled out. Basically, by the mere fact that there's seismic activity there, it's ruled out because we don't want another Fukushima like most people say. So we have, of course, we are left off with the coastal area and the lake region area. So basically, and Lake Turkana. So basically with that information, and this is information that was done, it was done by experts. It was not done by any politician who said, we want this here. Even if they put how much money, it will not happen because there are things that you have to look, there are things that you have to consider, right? So currently we've done the site selection and the first and the second. So what you're seeing there, the site characterization, once you identify a site, you need to now confirm that particular site. You're looking at the hydrology, you're looking at the geologists. This is where geologists shine. Geologists, engineers, and scientists, because they have to look at all the soil composition, the hydrology, the rock composition, just basically into detail, etc. And once that is done, you have to, again, when you go to, before you even construct, you have to, again, confirm everything and monitor everything. In fact, when the Kilifi people were protesting, the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency were trying to set up a meteorological station to do the site characterization. But because of course, misinformation here and there, they said that the construction had already begun. But you see, it was all misinformation. Anyway, that's just to appreciate that a site selection is not something that is decided by a politician somewhere. Maybe it has, what do you call it? It gives more, things are moving faster with the political support because then that means you're affirming the national position. But it does not mean that that is the only determinant. Like I've said, even if you want to go to Rift Valley right now and so you want to put a nuclear power plant, even the international organization will not allow that. So, another question that comes up, every person, especially on TikTok, they normally ask, inataka kuleta Fukushima or Chernobyl in our country. But you see, over time, accidents happen. Even the phones that you're having with you, they're not the same phones that you're using back in 10 years ago. Why? Because there's so many improvements that have been done, whether in terms of performance or battery or whatever. This is just to say the same thing has happened in the nuclear industry. The type of nuclear power plants we're having back in the 1950s or the 2011 are not the same power plants that you're having right now. And there are different measures of safety that have been put in place. So number one is prevention, meaning that whatever construction that you're doing, whatever materials you're using, whatever safety, the building or whatever, it has to make sure that it's safety. I mean, it has to make sure that it's safe. And this is actually tested before they leave the manufacturing place. I had an opportunity to go to Hitachi GE, which is a company that manufactures this particular parts. And it's a company managed by Japan and the US. And you can see the amount of detail they put into each and every design. And then number two is the control. So if, for example, an earthquake happens, for example, you don't need someone to go and shut down or do whatever. Although the power plants are designed now, they can automatically shut themselves down. So that meaning that they stop the reaction process from occurring, meaning that there's no more heat, so the whole process is being stopped. Unlike what happened in Chernobyl, where they had to have Chernobyl and I think 3 Mile Island, where someone had to control this particular thing. So you see, of course, in terms of design, this is also something that have improved. And then also containment is another thing. So in case of a nuclear power plant happens, we don't say it won't happen. The same way you can ride you're driving your car and something somehow happens. We don't say it won't happen, but in case it does happen, the new power plants that are constructed have a containment building where if at all something happens, that radiation is contained in that particular building, which means it reduces exposure because that is the most dangerous thing that can happen. And then the second last is, of course, emergency. In case something happens and there's leakage or radiation has been exposed to people, you must have an emergency response plan, and you must have like evacuation zones and also shelter positions just to make sure that people have been evacuated in good time. Again, I keep referring to Chernobyl because those are some of the lessons that we learned from that particular accident, because a lot of people, information was concealed and then people are still remain the same place. So radiation exposure, because of course, the more you're exposed to radiation, then the harmful it is for you. Of course, you have long-term recovery. This, if at all the accident happened like it did in Fukushima, then you must have a way of containing, like decommissioning the whole process and making sure that you have health monitoring and also decommissioning. Decommissioning means to just dismantle the whole plant. I don't know which group had said something to do with it was interesting that we cannot, I think it was group, this one. you cannot manage water because you cannot manage floods. That's a good point. But how many have heard of a nuclear waste? Okay, besides the one that was somewhere in northern region, how many have had any complaints of radiation before? Besides that, like issues to do with waste management. We're already using nuclear technology, like I mentioned, in the medical sector, and that is being managed by Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority. They actually have a facility down at Oleluya. How many people have had an opportunity to go there? You've been there, and they're doing a good job so far. You think, yeah, of course. What you're seeing there, you must first categorize your nuclear waste. There are different levels to it. What we are managing currently is low-level waste. Those that have short lifespan, the clothing, the PPEs, and such like things. The ones that radiation is just a short lifespan, they decay quickly. Then you have intermediate waste, and then you have the high-level waste. Now, the high-level waste is the biggest problem because then they have a longer lifespan over 100 years. And if you don't manage it well, then that is going to cause chaos. And that is the biggest issue that people have with nuclear technology. However, they are at storage, and this thing has been managed and has been stored for years on end. I mentioned the US started using nuclear in the 1950s, and I will tell you up to today, the amount of waste that the amount of nuclear waste cannot cannot even fill near a stadium. That is, you can imagine it was 60 years of operation. So what happens if once you remove I mentioned the fuel assembly, it's still reactive at that point. So they're normally stored in a pre to cool for like about 3 to 5 years. And then once they cool off, they are transferred into a dry cask. This dry cask they can stay there for the longest time. And even if you touch it like this, even if you go and kiss it, nothing will happen to you because of the way the structure is engineered. And then you have long-term disposal actually, like the deep geological solution. This is actually done in Finland, where they store, of course, once they stored in the cask, they're put underneath. So they dig deep down, they find a geological space where the population is low, and they store the waste down there. And then another interesting thing is, scientists realize that this particular fuel can actually be recycled. So instead of even storing them, they're repurposing the same. And then the last one is dismantling or deconstructing. And then, like I mentioned, the international nuclear industry is one of the industry that is globally watched. Like, if you do anything in Kenya, just to me, the International Atomic Energy Agency has this information. I think you've seen like cases where a nuclear facility in Iran has done whatever, something, and immediately the International Atomic Energy Agency is already there following it up, monitoring the situation, and giving reports and statements and all that. That is how serious they take in terms of safety. So, and then providing guidelines and all that. I think even before I even said the Chernobyl and Fukushima, I'm sure most of you have heard of this, right? How many times does the conversation come and the first thing is, exactly, this happens, it happened. We are not saying it did not happen, but then again, given the history, these are the only major accidents that have happened in the nuclear industry since they started operation back in the 1957. There are lessons that have been learned, like I mentioned before, from safety culture to design and to even how they're having the separate roles for a regulator and a promoter and a owner operator, so that you don't find yourself being compromised because one institution is doing everything at the same time. So for Chernobyl, I mentioned the RBM reactor did not have the containment building. So the radiation was exposed. And then again, they concealed the information. They saying everything is okay when it was not. And the more you wait, the more you're not putting measures in place, the more the radiation is spread across. So those are the big learnings. And then for Fukushima, that one was basically because of seismic activity. I mean, earthquake and the tsunami. And what they're doing right now is they're improving how they're constructing their nuclear power plants to take into consideration the earthquake and the tsunami. And then, of course, the 3 Mile Island was also some equipment malfunction was the reason for this. And there are so many lessons that were learned. I think I've just made that in the summary. The lessons that I've mentioned over the whole lecture. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.